My daughter told me I was cut out of the family because I refused to give her $25,000. Imagine hearing those words from the child you carried, raised, and sacrificed everything for. It was like a knife straight through the heart, sharper than any betrayal I had ever known. But as painful as it was, that night became the moment I realized the truth, that the love I thought I was giving had been twisted into something unrecognizable. Before we go on, don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to be told. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Margaret Wilson, though everyone called her Maggie, was 68 when her world was torn apart. To anyone on the outside, she was a picture of quiet resilience, a woman who had lived through decades of hardship, and yet carried herself with a kind of grace people admired. She had been married to Harold for 45 years, a man who never made grand speeches or gestures, but who built a life with her brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. They raised 2 children together, Michael, their eldest, practical and steady like his father, and Susan, their youngest, bright and ambitious but with a hunger for more that sometimes worried Maggie. When Harold died suddenly from a heart attack, Maggie's foundation cracked. The house felt emptier, the silence heavier. Every chair at the dining table reminded her of the absence she couldn't fill. It was Susan who swept in first, urging her to sell the family home and move into something smaller, for safety, for convenience, she said. Maggie hesitated at first. That home wasn't just 4 walls, it was where she had raised her babies, where Harold had painted the nursery, where birthdays had been celebrated with cake and laughter. But Susan's arguments were persuasive. She and her husband David insisted they would handle the details. "You'll be closer to us, Mom. We'll make sure you're never alone," Susan promised. At the time, it sounded like love. Looking back, Maggie wondered if it was the first thread being pulled loose. She moved into a modest condo, smaller but comfortable, with a balcony overlooking a patch of trees where sparrows gathered in the morning. She tried to adjust to the quiet, tried to find her rhythm without Harold. And at first, Susan and David were attentive. They visited, brought groceries, helped set up her television. Maggie felt grateful, even reassured. But soon, the requests began. It started small, Susan mentioning the kids' school trip costs, David's car needing repairs, an unexpected bill. Maggie had always been generous, helping her children seemed natural, even necessary. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. She didn't think twice. After all, Harold had always said, we work hard not just for ourselves, but to give our children a better start. But the requests grew bolder. "We're behind on the mortgage, Mom," Susan said one evening, her voice thick with tension. "We might lose the house. Could you help? Just until David's bonus comes through." Maggie's heart clenched at the thought of her daughter and grandchildren losing their home. She wrote the check. Each time, Susan's words were laced with urgency, sometimes even guilt. "If you love us, you'll help. We don't know what we'd do without you." Maggie's savings began to dwindle, quietly, almost invisibly. She rarely checked the totals, trusting that she could always get by, until one night she sat at her kitchen table, calculator in hand, and realized she had given away nearly $38,000 in less than a year. And yet, Susan and David didn't seem to be drowning. Maggie scrolled through social media late one night, her eyes catching on photos, Susan in a new dress at a rooftop restaurant, David holding cocktails with friends, the family smiling in front of a rental car at the beach. Her stomach turned. She stared at the glow of her phone until tears blurred the images. The words Susan had told her so often, "we're barely scraping by," collided with the reality of champagne glasses and ocean sunsets. That was when the first spark of doubt flickered in her chest. Still, Maggie said nothing. Confrontation had never been her way. She had survived childhood by staying quiet, by keeping her pain hidden. Harold had been the one who shielded her from the harsher edges of the world. Without him, she felt vulnerable, exposed, and maybe a little desperate to keep whatever family she had left close. To question Susan, to accuse her, felt like risking the fragile bond that tethered them together. But as weeks stretched into months, Maggie's unease grew. She began to notice little things, Susan brushing off questions with irritation, David avoiding eye contact when money was mentioned, the sharpness in Susan's voice if Maggie hesitated before agreeing to another transfer. And beneath it all was a gnawing fear: if she stopped helping, would they stop coming around? Would she be left truly alone? It was Michael who noticed the change in his mother's voice during one of their weekly phone calls. "You sound tired, Mom. Is everything okay?" he asked. Maggie forced a laugh, brushed it off. But Michael had inherited his father's intuition. "Mom, if something's wrong, you can tell me." She almost did, but the words caught in her throat. How could she admit that her own daughter might be exploiting her? How could she confess that the family she had poured her life into was draining her dry? Shame settled over her like a heavy blanket, pressing down until she couldn't breathe. And so, she kept the secret a little longer, even as her bank statements told the truth she refused to say out loud. The first time Susan asked for a large sum, Maggie hesitated. $25,000 wasn't a small amount. It wasn't like the 100 here, a few thousand there, the kind of help she had quietly given before. This time, Susan's voice carried an edge of desperation, a sharpened urgency that made Maggie's heart pound. "Mom, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. We're drowning. David's hours got cut, the mortgage company is breathing down our necks, and if we don't pay this off, we could lose everything. Please. You're the only one who can help." Maggie sat at her kitchen table, the phone pressed to her ear, staring at the notepad where she still scribbled her grocery lists in Harold's careful script. $25,000. She thought of Harold's face, the way he always guarded their savings like a fortress, reminding her that retirement wasn't a luxury, it was survival. "That money is for when we can't work anymore," he used to say. "It's for you, Maggie. To keep you safe." And now, here was Susan, asking for nearly half of what remained. Her chest tightened. "Susan, that's a lot of money. I don't know if..." "Mom." Susan cut her off sharply. "Don't you trust me? Don't you want to see your grandchildren have a home? Do you want us on the street?" The words landed like stones. Maggie's breath caught, shame prickling up her neck. How could she say no when Susan painted such a picture? Children without a home. Her daughter struggling. Harold would have wanted her to help, wouldn't he? That night, Maggie didn't sleep. She wandered the condo barefoot, touching framed photos as if they might guide her. Her savings were more than numbers, they were the years Harold had sacrificed overtime shifts for, the birthdays they hadn't celebrated in restaurants, the vacations they had put off. Every dollar carried his fingerprint. But Susan's voice echoed louder. "Do you want us on the street?" By morning, her resolve had cracked. She transferred the money, her hands trembling as she clicked submit. She told herself it was temporary, that Susan and David would recover, that her daughter wouldn't let her down. But deep inside, a hollow feeling took root. Weeks passed. At first, Susan was effusive with gratitude. She hugged Maggie tightly, tears shining in her eyes. "You saved us, Mom. I don't know what we would have done without you." She brought flowers, cooked dinner in Maggie's kitchen, made promises of paying her back when they got back on their feet. But the promises faded quickly, like ink left out in the sun. The phone calls came less often. The visits grew sparse. Maggie scrolled through social media one afternoon and felt her stomach twist. Susan and David, smiling in a picture at a ski lodge, glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Much-needed getaway with the family." Maggie blinked at the screen, her vision blurring. Skiing. Vacations. Just weeks after she had handed them $25,000. The betrayal was quiet at first, more confusion than anger. Maybe they had gotten a discount. Maybe it was a gift from friends. She tried to reason with herself, tried to silence the creeping suspicion. But the photos kept coming, new clothes, dinners out, happy outings that didn't look like survival. Michael noticed the shift in his mother before she admitted it to anyone. During a Sunday visit, he studied her face as she poured him coffee. The hands that held the pot shook slightly. "You're not sleeping, are you?" he asked gently. Maggie forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just getting older." But Michael wasn't convinced. He watched her carefully, his brow furrowing. "Is Susan bothering you again?" The question startled her. The coffee sloshed in her cup, dripping onto the saucer. "What makes you say that?" "I know my sister," he said, leaning back, his voice low. "She's always been persuasive when she wants something. And I know you. You'd give until you had nothing left." "Did she ask for money?" Maggie's heart pounded. She wanted to confess, to unburden herself, but shame sealed her lips. How could she tell Michael that she had already given away so much? How could she let him see her as weak, foolish, deceived? "No," she lied softly. "She's just busy with the kids." Michael studied her a long moment, then nodded, though his eyes betrayed doubt. He didn't press, but Maggie could feel the unspoken words between them. The next time Susan called, the desperation was gone from her tone. Instead, it was impatient, almost entitled. "Mom, we've been thinking, it would be easier if you just gave us access to your account. That way, if something urgent comes up, we don't have to bother you." Maggie's breath hitched. "Susan, that's not how this works. That money is all I have. It's for my care. For when I can't take care of myself." Her daughter sighed, exasperated. "Mom, you're being dramatic. You're still healthy. You've got Michael if anything happens. Don't you trust me?" Those words, "don't you trust me," landed heavier than before, pressing against her ribs like a weight. She thought of Harold again, his warnings echoing in her ears. "Don't let anyone touch the nest egg, Maggie. It's your lifeline." But Susan was relentless. Each call chipped away at her confidence. She alternated between guilt and flattery, painting herself as both victim and savior. One day, she would cry, "You don't understand how hard it is out here." The next, she would say brightly, "With your help, we could finally get ahead, Mom. Wouldn't that make you proud?" Maggie felt trapped between love and duty, between protecting her future and giving in to her daughter's demands. Nights became battlegrounds where she argued with herself in the dark, whispering Harold's name as if he could answer. And through it all, Michael's quiet concern lingered in the background. He never accused, never pushed, but his watchful eyes reminded her that someone still saw her truth. The balance of her world was shifting, though she tried to deny it. What had started as love, as care, was becoming something darker, something that tasted of betrayal. She could feel the invisible chains tightening around her wrists, each demand from Susan pulling tighter. She didn't know it yet, but the breaking point was drawing closer. The silence of Maggie's condo had grown oppressive. Once it had been a sanctuary, filled with the soft sounds of Harold's steady breathing or the rustle of a newspaper turning. Now, it was filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of a clock. Each sound seemed louder, sharper, a reminder of the emptiness that lingered in Harold's absence. And into that silence came Susan's voice, always through the phone, always carrying a new request. It was never framed as a demand, at least, not at first. It was an emergency, a small thing, something that wouldn't inconvenience her. But each request chipped away at Maggie's savings until she began to dread checking her balance. Then came the day Susan crossed the invisible line Maggie had clung to. "Mom," Susan began, her tone brisk, as though she had been rehearsing. "David and I have been thinking, it's time you sell the condo. It's too big for you anyway. The money could help us all. You don't need much space. You could move in with us. Think about it, you'd be surrounded by your grandchildren. We'd take care of you." Maggie froze, her hand tightening on the arm of her chair until her knuckles whitened. Sell the condo? The home she and Harold had built their retirement around, the place where every corner still whispered his name? Her voice came out hoarse. Susan, that's my home. That's all I have left of him. Susan's sigh was sharp, dismissive. Mom, you're being sentimental. Houses are just walls and floors. Family is what matters. Don't you trust me to know what's best for you? The words sliced through Maggie's chest. She felt her breath catch, the room tilting as if the ground had shifted beneath her. She pressed a trembling hand to her heart. Harold's voice thundered in her memory, his warnings, his fierce protection of what they had saved. For the first time, she allowed herself to hear it clearly. She's using you, Maggie. Don't let her take everything. Tears burned her eyes. I can't do that, Susan. I can't. The silence on the other end of the line stretched, heavy and cold, before Susan spoke again, her voice dripping with irritation. Fine. If that's how you want to be. Don't say I didn't try to include you. The call ended, leaving Maggie staring at the phone in her hand, her heart pounding. That night, she couldn't push the images from her mind, Susan and David clinking glasses on vacation, their children smiling in expensive new clothes, all while she sat alone in her condo, the walls closing in. For years she had believed that giving meant loving, that sacrifice was the only way to prove her devotion. But now, she felt stripped bare, hollowed out by betrayal. Michael came the next day, unannounced. He brought her a bag of groceries and set them on the counter without a word. He didn't ask if she was eating, though the hollowness of her cheeks spoke for itself. He didn't ask if she was sleeping, though the dark circles under her eyes told him all he needed to know. Instead, he sat at the table with her, his hands folded, his gaze steady. Mom, he said softly, I need you to tell me the truth. How much have you given her? The question cracked something open inside her. For a long moment, Maggie just stared at him, the weight of her secret pressing against her chest. Then, slowly, she whispered, too much. Michael's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he clenched his fists. How much? Almost everything. Her voice broke, the words spilling out in a rush of shame. She wanted me to sell the condo. She said I should move in with her. But Michael, it's our home. It's all I have left of your father. Michael closed his eyes, his face contorted with grief and fury. When he opened them again, there was a resolve in his expression that Maggie hadn't seen before. She doesn't get to do this to you. Not anymore. Maggie shook her head, panic flaring. No, Michael. Please. She's still your sister. I can't lose both of you. If you fight, if you turn against each other, her voice faltered, her chest aching with the unbearable thought of her children tearing apart what little family she had left. Michael reached across the table, covering her trembling hand with his. Mom, I love my sister. But I love you more. And I'm not going to stand by while she destroys you. Dad trusted me to look out for you. And I will. His words pierced the fog of shame and confusion, a lifeline thrown across the chasm that had opened inside her. For the first time in months, Maggie felt the faint stirrings of strength. But strength did not erase the ache. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, Harold's photo on the nightstand beside her. She whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking. I tried, Harold. I tried to keep the family together. But she doesn't see me. She only sees what I can give. What do I do? The silence gave no answer. Only the ticking clock, each second counting down to a choice she knew she would have to make. Because now the truth was undeniable, Susan didn't just want help. She wanted control. And if Maggie didn't stop her, she would lose not only her savings, not only her home, but the last remnants of the life she and Harold had built. The breaking point had come. What Maggie chose next would define everything. The days following her confession to Michael blurred together, but something inside Maggie had shifted. For so long, she had carried the weight of silence, convincing herself that if she just gave a little more, endured a little longer, Susan would finally see her as a mother worth loving. But now the truth sat in the open, raw, and undeniable. Michael knew. And because he knew, she could no longer hide behind the illusion that everything was fine. He began visiting more often, his presence steady and grounding. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes just a quiet strength that filled the empty spaces of her condo. He didn't push her, didn't lecture her, but every so often he would look at her in that searching way, as if reminding her that she wasn't powerless, not anymore. Maggie found herself reaching for Harold's photograph more often too. She would trace the edge of the frame, whispering apologies into the night. Yet with each apology, a new question rose: what would Harold want me to do now? One afternoon, Michael placed an envelope on the kitchen table. It was worn from his pocket, but the papers inside were crisp, official. "Mom," he said gently, "these are your bank statements. I went with you last week, remember? I wanted you to see it clearly. No more guessing." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The numbers glared up at her, smaller and more pitiful than she had imagined. Decades of careful saving, chipped away until only a fraction remained. A wave of nausea swept over her. "I let this happen," she whispered. "No," Michael said firmly, leaning forward. "She did this. She manipulated you. She twisted your love into something she could use. That's not your fault." Maggie shook her head, tears spilling over. "But I allowed it. I wanted her love so badly, Michael. I thought if I helped enough, she would finally see me." Michael's voice softened. "Mom, you don't have to buy love. Not mine, not anyone's. Dad knew that. That's why he warned you." He reached across the table, his hand steady over hers. "And I promise you, I'm not going to let her take what's left. But you have to be willing to fight with me. Not against her, but for yourself." The words lingered in Maggie's chest long after Michael left that evening. Fight for herself. The idea felt foreign, almost selfish. She had spent her entire life putting others first: Harold, the children, the church, the community. To stand up for herself seemed like breaking some sacred vow of motherhood. But as she moved through her quiet condo, her hand brushing over Harold's chair, his coat still hanging in the closet, she realized something she had ignored for too long: standing up for herself was also standing up for him. Their sacrifices, their careful planning, their quiet life of modest choices, it had all been for the future they imagined together. To let Susan strip it away would be to let Harold's memory be desecrated. The next call from Susan came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Maggie nearly let it go to voicemail, her chest tightening at the sight of her daughter's name. But something inside her refused to cower this time. She answered. "Mom," Susan's voice was brisk, impatient. "Did you think about what I said? Selling the condo? David already talked to a realtor." Maggie's breath caught. For a moment, fear pressed down, threatening to crush her. Then Michael's words echoed in her memory. "Fight for yourself." Her voice was unsteady but clear. "No, Susan. I won't sell the condo." The silence on the other end was sharp, slicing through the line. Then Susan's tone hardened. "Are you kidding me? You're being ridiculous. You don't need that place. You don't even live in most of it. And we need the money more than you do. Don't you care about your family?" Maggie's hand trembled, but she held the phone tight. "I do care. That's why I've helped you. But this is too much. It's my home. It's all I have left of your father. I'm not giving it up." Susan's scoff was cold. "Fine. If that's how you want to be. Don't expect us to come around anymore. Don't expect the kids to visit. You're choosing a house over your family." The words sliced deep, sharper than any knife. But for the first time, Maggie recognized them for what they were: manipulation. Not truth. Not love. Her voice quavered, but she did not back down. If you want to stay away, that's your choice. But I won't be threatened into giving up my life. She hung up before Susan could respond. The silence afterward was deafening, and Maggie's body shook as though she had just stepped away from a battlefield. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but beneath the grief there was something else, something fierce and unfamiliar. Relief. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with Michael again. She told him what she had said, every word, every tremor in her voice. His eyes filled with pride as he listened. "Dad would be proud of you," he said softly. For the first time in a long while, Maggie allowed herself to believe it. She still didn't know what Susan's next move would be. She didn't know if the fracture between them could ever heal. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity: she would no longer be silent. She would no longer give away pieces of herself just to be seen. And that realization, fragile as it was, marked the beginning of something new. Maggie wasn't done yet. The days after Maggie's defiance were eerily quiet. No phone calls. No texts. No surprise visits from Susan's children. The silence pressed against the walls of the condo, filling every room with an echo of absence. At first, Maggie convinced herself it was temporary, that Susan just needed time to cool down. But by the third week, when the mailbox held no birthday card for Harold's memory, no drawing from her granddaughter, she understood that Susan had meant what she said. The punishment for saying no was exile. Maggie tried to fill the silence with her usual routines. She baked pies and brought them to the church potluck. She knitted sweaters for the donation box. She even joined a seniors' walking group at the park. On the surface, her days looked full, but beneath every smile was the raw ache of loss. Family was supposed to be unconditional. She had given Susan life, love, and sacrifice. How could her daughter turn her back so easily, as if Maggie were nothing more than a checkbook that had run dry? The grief came in waves. Sometimes it was sharp, like when she passed a family at the grocery store, laughing together over what cereal to buy. Other times it was dull and heavy, lingering in her chest when she set the table for one. The hardest moments were at night, when the condo grew still and Harold's chair sat empty. She would reach across the bed, her hand brushing the cool sheets, and whisper into the darkness, "I tried, Harold. I really tried." One evening, as she sat staring at the television without hearing a word, the phone rang. Her heart leapt when she saw Susan's name flash on the screen. Against her better judgment, hope surged, maybe an apology, maybe a truce. But the voice on the other end was not softened by remorse. It was sharp, clipped, businesslike. "Mom, since you won't help us, I need you to know we've decided to move forward without you. We're refinancing the house, and David's cousin is going to co-sign. But don't expect to be part of anything anymore. You made your choice." Maggie swallowed hard. "Susan, it doesn't have to be this way. I love you." There was a pause. Then a cold laugh. "Love? If you loved us, you wouldn't be so selfish. Enjoy your condo." The line went dead. Maggie set the phone down, her hand trembling. The words sliced through her, leaving her hollow. Selfish. That was the word Harold's mother had once used when Maggie chose to work part-time instead of full-time, so she could be home with the kids. It was the word Susan herself had spat as a teenager whenever Maggie said no to another shopping trip. And now it came back, sharpened and final, branding her with shame. But this time, the shame didn't linger as long. Michael's voice echoed in her memory, steady and grounding, "She manipulated you. This isn't love." The following Sunday, Maggie found herself at church earlier than usual. She slipped into a pew, the stained glass casting soft colors over her face. The pastor spoke of forgiveness, of setting boundaries not as walls but as a way to protect what is sacred. Maggie listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap, and for the first time she realized that protecting herself wasn't betrayal. It was faith. Later that week, Michael stopped by with his 2 children. They filled the condo with chatter and laughter, their drawings covering the fridge, their voices spilling into every corner like sunlight. Maggie held her grandson in her lap, breathing in the warmth of his hair, and her heart ached with both joy and sorrow. She had lost one child's affection, but here was proof she was not alone. Still, Susan's absence was a shadow she couldn't ignore. When the holidays approached, Maggie received no invitation, no card, no sign that she was welcome in Susan's home. On Christmas Eve, she placed a single candle in the window, a tradition Harold had loved, symbolizing hope for those far from home. She sat in her chair, the glow flickering against her tired face, and whispered into the silence, "If you ever come back, Susan, I'll be here. But I won't let you destroy me to get there." It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't even a plea for peace. It was simply truth. The breaking point had come and gone, and Maggie stood on the other side, battered, bruised, but still standing. She didn't know if Susan would ever soften, if reconciliation was even possible. But she did know that she could no longer be controlled by the fear of losing what was never truly hers to keep. That night, as she turned off the light and the condo settled into quiet, Maggie felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not joy. Not even relief. But a small, steady flicker of strength. And for the first time, she believed it might be enough. Winter passed into spring, and Maggie's condo grew brighter with the lengthening days. She planted herbs on her balcony, their green shoots reaching toward the sun, fragile yet resilient. Life, she realized, had a way of finding new beginnings even after the harshest season. But the ache of Susan's absence never fully left. There were mornings when Maggie reached instinctively for her phone, ready to share a funny dream or ask about the grandchildren, only to stop herself with a bitter reminder. There were afternoons when she saw mother and daughter walking arm in arm and felt a tug so deep she had to turn away. Grief, she had learned, wasn't always about death. Sometimes it was about the living choosing to leave you behind. And yet, she found herself less defined by that loss. Michael remained steady at her side, a living testament that not all children turned away. His calls came often, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to share the small joys of life, his daughter's piano recital, his son's science project, the garden he was trying to cultivate in his backyard. Each story planted seeds of healing in Maggie's heart. The church community, too, became more than a place of worship. It became her refuge. There, among pews worn smooth by generations, Maggie discovered a truth she had once overlooked: family could be chosen. Friends sat with her at suppers, neighbors asked after her health, and fellow worshippers invited her into their homes for holidays. The candle she had placed in her window on Christmas Eve became less a symbol of waiting for Susan and more a beacon of welcome for the people who still wanted her presence. And slowly, Maggie allowed herself to embrace something she had once resisted: boundaries. When Susan did send a message months later, a curt text asking if Maggie would reconsider helping out just a little, Maggie stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. The old Maggie, the one desperate to keep peace, would have caved, would have seen the request as a chance to repair the rift. But the woman she was now recognized the trap. She typed back 2 words, steady and clear: "I can't." Then she turned off the phone, set it aside, and returned to her knitting, her hands steady. It wasn't triumph she felt, nor bitterness. It was freedom. Evenings in the condo grew gentler. Maggie read more, prayed more, allowed silence to become a companion rather than a tormentor. Sometimes, she would catch herself smiling for no reason at all, the weight on her chest lifting little by little. Still, the story was unfinished. Reconciliation with Susan might come one day, or it might never arrive. Maggie no longer tied her worth to that uncertain future. She had given her daughter every chance, every ounce of patience, and still, it hadn't been enough. But she had also given herself permission to step out of the shadows of guilt and stand in her own light. And that, Maggie realized, was the real inheritance she wanted to leave behind. Not the condo, not the savings account, not the tangible assets that could be fought over or diminished. What she wanted to leave was an example that dignity matters, that love without respect is not love at all, and that no one, not even your own child, has the right to demand your soul in exchange for their approval. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through her living room window, Maggie took out a fresh notebook. She began to write, not a will, but a letter. It wasn't to Susan, or even to Michael, but to anyone who might one day stumble across her words. She wrote about Harold, about raising her children, about the joys and sacrifices, about the pain of being cast aside. And she wrote about the moment she realized that survival wasn't enough. She wanted others, especially those who had suffered in silence, to know they could reclaim themselves too. The words came slowly at first, then faster, spilling from her pen in uneven lines but carrying a clarity she hadn't felt in years. By the time she set the pen down, her hands were tired but her heart was lighter. The letter wasn't finished, but then, neither was she. Maggie looked around the condo, at the framed photos on the wall, at the herbs reaching for the light, at the candles still waiting on the windowsill, and she understood that while her story had been scarred by betrayal, it hadn't been defined by it. She had written new chapters, and there were more to come. Her daughter might never return. Or she might. Either way, Maggie was no longer waiting to be chosen. She had chosen herself. And now, the story turns to you. What would you do if you were in Maggie's place? Would you hold firm and protect your boundaries, even at the cost of family ties? Have you, or someone close to you, lived through something similar, a painful rift, a betrayal that cut deeper because it came from blood? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments. And as we close, tell us, which story should we explore next? There are so many hidden struggles, so many quiet battles like Maggie's, waiting to be told. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't about what we lose,